It should be working now. Looks like I forgot to start the button.
Perfect.
It should be working now. Looks like I forgot to start the button. It should be working now. Looks like I forgot to start the button. Hang on, Amy. Hang on, Amy. Folks on YouTube, please mute your phones or devices. Folks on YouTube, please mute your phones or devices. Folks on YouTube, please mute your. We'll be right back. Sorry about this.
Hey Jeff, it's Jennifer. I'm in Judge Wilder's courtroom. She is pulling
Judge, you're still muted. We can't hear you on Zoom.
Got it. Except how could I hear you?
Thank you. I had unmuted myself to tell you that, but I'm going to put it back on mute. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now I think we have technology issues resolved. Mr. Baca?
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, if we could begin, could you please state your name for the record?
Matthew McKee,
Mr. McKee, where are you currently employed?
Burger King.
Mr. McKee, I'm going to be asking you about events that occurred on February 25th of 2021. Do you have any issues recalling events from that day?
Not too much other than the fact that it's been a while and I haven't really spoken much about it.
Okay. I'll first ask you, on that day at around 9:00 p.m., do you recall your location?
At 9 exactly, I would say on First Street, right off Main Street here in Newton, Kansas. We're at a friend's house. It's kind of a duplex house. We were there hanging out with a group of friends that night.
Okay.
Sir, could you scoot up just a little bit closer to the microphone? Thank you so much.
Do you recall which friend's home that was?
Eric Smith.
Eric Smith, okay. Do you recall who all was at that residence with you that night?
So Eric Smith, Celeste, I think her last name's Bailey. It's his girlfriend. I was present. My wife, Sierra McKee, was present. Paige Dodson, I think is how you say her last name. She was present. I want to say so was Shannon. She was present. And so was Ian Foy.
Okay. Now, at some point after 9:00, were you ever outside that home?
If we were outside, it was usually to smoke cigarettes because we don't smoke indoors and at that residence.
Okay. Mr. McKee, do you also know an individual by the name of Ybarra?
Yes, I do.
How do you know him?
I met him through my wife. My wife knew him when they're younger, since he was a kid. I mean, I guess he still is, but she's known him for a while. So I met through them. My wife is best friends with his, at the time, girlfriend, Paige Dodson.
Okay. Do you know how many times you interacted with him before that night?
Oh, several. He would come to our house and hang out, him and Paige.
Okay. Now, at some point that evening on February 25th, 2021, did you see Gabe Ybarra?
Not until Ian and I had left the residence. We were on our way to go to his house.
Okay. Do you recall what time that was?
I would rough estimate, I would say roughly around 10, maybe 10:30.
And so do you recall that evening? Was the weather clear?
Yeah, cold.
Okay. And I assume it was dark out at this point.
Yes, it was.
Okay. So when you're leaving this home, were you leaving with Mr. Foy?
Yes.
Okay. And as you were leaving the home, what did you first notice?
So we backed out of the driveway of the residence we were at, which is connected to Paige Dobson. That was their neighbor in that same duplex. Gabe had lived there as well prior to that. When we backed out, we started driving, I want to say west towards Meridian Casey's gas station area. They live, Ian and Foy and Shannon Barber, they live in a trailer park back there. And that's where we're heading to go get fireworks. And when we had passed the first, there's one street as you leave that residence we were at. And as we passed that, we had noticed, I want to say a black pickup truck had ripped in behind Paige Dobson's car. And that's when I had noticed Gabe was in her car, was getting stuff out of her car.
So I want to ask, as far as the people in your vehicle, was it just you and Mr. Foy?
Yes.
And you indicated you observed a black pickup pull in. Did you recognize that pickup at the time?
I had seen it prior. I want to say it was Gabe's pickup truck. I think at the time Paige drove a little car. So yeah, I believe it was Gabe's pickup. I'm not 100% on that, but I'd seen it before.
And the vehicle that you believed was Gabe's pickup, where did you see that vehicle initially go?
It just pulled behind Paige's vehicle on the side of the road where it was parked.
And you had seen Paige's vehicle before? Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
Did you see anyone get out of the black pickup truck at that time?
Gabe Ybarra.
And when he exited the black pickup truck, what did you observe next?
He just ran up to the car, opened the driver's side, and was sifting through the car. From where it looked as if he was getting property of some form out of the vehicle.
Okay.
I guess they were going through something. They're broke up or something. I'm not sure if they're fully broke up, but I know Paige just an hour prior to that was saying pretty much
I'm
that.
going to object to what Paige said. It's hearsay. This is present.
Well, Judge, I don't think anything that Paige would say at this point would go to the truth of the matter asserted for the hearing today.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. So when you observed Mr. Ybarra enter this vehicle that you believe was Paige Dodson's, what did you do next?
I regretfully said to Ian, who was driving the vehicle, I was like, I'm pretty sure Gabe is in Paige's vehicle, which I believed at that time Paige would not have liked.
Okay. And did you say anything to Mr. Ybarra at this point?
Not at that point, no.
Okay. After you informed Mr. Foy, what did you do next?
I can't remember 100% if it was before we hit the railroad tracks on First Street, or if it was right afterwards, but I know Ian right then flipped around and started heading back.
Okay. So at some point, did you observe Mr. Ybarra exit Paige Dodson's vehicle?
At that point, when we had made it back onto that location, he was already driving away. He was pulling out from behind her vehicle and he was driving, I want to say I'm not sure what the building is exactly, but he was taking a turn, or he was going around a block to get back onto First Street.
And up to this point, you hadn't had any conversation with Mr. Ybarra?
No.
Is that correct? So as you observe Mr. Ybarra's vehicle leave, what did you do next?
As he stopped his vehicle to get back, there was a stop sign as he went around that block, which Ian started following him. And when he got up to that stop sign on First Street, I don't know exact words, but Gabe was yelling something out of the driver's side window back at our vehicle.
And at this point, Mr. Ybarra's vehicle was still in front of yours, is that correct?
Yes.
As Ian was initially following Mr. Ybarra, was there anything about Ian's driving that you noticed?
Mostly just trying to keep up with him.
Okay. You indicated at some point, Mr. Ybarra's vehicle stopped and was yelling back at your vehicle, is that correct?
So before we reached that moment, First Street hits two lanes to where you can turn to Athletic Park right there. And at that point, Gabe got into another lane and he had slowed down and we got ahead and then he was behind us. We reached First and Meridian at the stoplights there. And at that point, he had pulled up alongside the passenger side of our vehicle on my side.
Okay. I want to go back a little bit. When you pulled in front of Mr. Ybarra's vehicle, where was the direction you were heading at that point?
We were heading west towards Meridian Street.
Were you going towards a certain location?
At that point, I figured I wasn't 100% sure what was going to happen. I knew the original plan was to head that way, go past Meridian, and go to their house to get fireworks.
Okay. And then once Mr. Ybarra's vehicle got behind your vehicle, what did you next observe?
Well, at that point, it was just me and Ian in the vehicle, and it was just, I was just telling Ian to calm down and chill out pretty much. I was wanting to remind him of Gabe's age and that we're like best case scenario that night. If something stupid happened, like it's trouble for Ian.
Was Mr. Ybarra's vehicle following your vehicle once he was behind you?
Yes.
How did you make that determination?
He was behind us driving. I mean, really there wasn't very many other options he could have went to. Maybe that was already the direction he was going, but he was behind us.
You indicated before he started following you, he was in the lane next to your vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you hear him make any statements at that point?
When we passed him, I didn't notice anything really being said or anything.
Okay. Now, as you're driving and Mr. Ybarra's vehicle is behind you, what happened next?
I had made the comment of what were you doing in Paige's vehicle? And he responded with something around the lines of, what the fuck does it, sorry about my language, Your Honor. But what the F is it to you? What business of it is it of yours?
Now, are you making these comments while you're driving?
No, we are stopped at a red light. I want to say it was flashing red at that time of night for just you to stop, make sure everything's okay.
Just want to make sure I understand the sequence of events. So you left and Mr. Ybarra's vehicle was following you after you had been in a lane next to him, correct?
Yes.
As you were driving, then you proceeded to stop again at another intersection. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Where was Mr. Ybarra's vehicle when you stopped at that intersection?
He pulled up next to us on the passenger side.
And that is when you asked him
What he was doing in her vehicle.
Okay. And you gave us his response. After he made that response, what happened next?
There was just a lot of yelling. Ian and I accusing of, are you stealing from Paige? Are you taking something that she doesn't know of? Things of that. And him pretty much saying, mind your business, and getting very agitated.
Now, assuming at some point you left that light you were stopped at, is that correct?
Well, it started to get to a point where Gabe and Ian were wanting to fight at that point.
How did you make that determination?
The words like, do you want your ass whooped? Get the F out of the vehicle. At one point, Gabe pulled right in front of us so we couldn't pull forward anymore right there in the intersection. And he hopped out of the truck. And at that point, Ian tried to jump out of the truck. I was still in the passenger seat. He had his door open and he was stepping out of the truck, and I grabbed Ian's hood from his hoodie and started yelling at him and yanked him back into the truck.
Once he was back in the truck, what'd you observe next?
Gabe stayed outside of the truck for a while. Ian ripped around him and started going forward. And then Gabe had gotten in his truck and continued across the street where we were. At that point, we turned, I do not know exactly the street name that Ian and Shannon live on, that trailer park is on. But when we turned off to go to that trailer park, Gabe did continue straight. So I thought it was over. I thought that was the end of it.
Okay. And at this point, your vehicle is stopped, correct?
We were continuing down towards the trailer, and when he continued to go straight, Ian then backed up back to the stop sign to make sure he wasn't turning around or whatever it was. And at that point, we had seen Gabe's headlights coming back. He had turned around somewhere down First Street and was coming back. And that's when Ian took off.
when Ian took off, what direction was he heading?
Towards their trailers. I would say that heading south.
Okay. And at this point, was Mr. Ybarra's vehicle continuing to follow your vehicle?
Yes.
What happened next?
At that point, I looked in the rear view and I couldn't see any headlights or the truck. And that's when I looked over and his truck is on the driver's side of Ian's truck. And Ian ended up ripping up onto a curb into a field to the right of where we're going. I want to say back on the west side of that street.
Okay. And the vehicle was stopped at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, we were stopped at that point in the field.
What did you observe Mr. Ybarra's vehicle do at this point?
He started doing donuts around our vehicle.
Now, if you could just be a bit more specific, what do you mean by doing donuts?
He just kept in his vehicle, just driving circles around our truck.
Okay. What did you do at this point?
I stayed in the truck and was telling Ian to back up and get the hell out of there.
And did Mr. Foy comply with that?
No, he did not.
What did you observe Mr. Foy do at that point?
At that point, Ian jumped out of the truck and said, either leave us alone or get out.
And did Mr. Ybarra have a statement in response to that?
He peeled off on the other side in the parking. I would say maybe 30, 40 feet away from us. He had parked his truck and hopped out.
And what did you observe Mr. Ybarra do at that point?
At that point, he was in a obvious stance to fight. He was ready to fight.
How'd you make that determination?
Just the way he was jumping back and forth, hands out. He was just jumping around right, pretty much as you would see a boxer or something, put his hands up and just pretty much squaring up.
And where was Mr. Foy at this point?
Mr. Floyd started to take off towards Gabe.
Was Mr. Foy running, walking? Do you recall?
He ran up.
Okay. Was the vehicle to Mr. Ybarra's, was the door to his vehicle open?
I want to say it was.
Now you're observing Mr. Foy approach Mr. Ybarra at this point. Is that correct?
That's right.
What did Mr. Ybarra do in response to that you observed?
He didn't back down. He just pretty much stayed where he was until Ian reached him. And then to me, at that point, like I hadn't even seen a weapon of any form. I tried to grab Ian and grab his hoodie again. I remember hearing his hoodie tear. He was not going to let me intervene, trying to stop it at all. At that point, the decision had been made that they were going to get physical.
And when they reached each other, did you observe any physical altercation?
It was really weird. It looked like they were just slapping at each other. It looked like neither of them knew they couldn't hit nothing if they tried. It just looked like slaps that were missing all around.
Do you recall who struck first?
I don't recall who struck first.
As you're observing this, what did you see happen next?
What concerned me was when at some point I saw Ian grab his side and he said, wait. He yelled out, wait, wait. And Gabe was still looked like swinging open hands, just like slapping at Ian. And Ian went to turn to run away and he was holding his side, trying to run. He was slumped over, but he seemed to be running good to me. It didn't seem like anything was too bad.
What did you observe Mr. Ybarra do when Ian slumped over?
So Ian started to try to run, I want to say, to his driver's side of his truck. I think he was trying to leave. Gabe followed him. They ran around the truck, I want to say once or twice. And then at that point, I knew things weren't okay because it's not like Ian to be running away. and he was still slumped, and he ran across the street on the east side of that street. And that's when he fell face first. And Gabe was, I want to say, he had 1 foot in that street, and I pretended to call the police. I didn't have a phone on me.
Did you yell out any statement about doing that?
Yeah, I pretended to be on phone with dispatch, and I said, I think Gabe just hurt my friend. And at that point, Gabe took off running to his truck. And that was the very first time I saw the knife in his hand.
Which hand did you see the knife in?
I can't recall which hand exactly.
It was a knife in Gabe Ybarra's hand that you observed?
Yes, I saw a silver shine coming out from the bottom of his hand.
Okay. Do you recall how he was holding that knife?
As if it was in like a downward stab from what I remember. Because when he was running, his hands were coming out. I saw the shine come from what looked like it was by his forearm or something when he was running.
You indicated Mr. Ybarra was heading back to his vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you observe him leaving his vehicle?
Yes.
Was that the last time you saw Mr. Ybarra that night?
That's the last time I've seen Ybarra since today.
What did you do at this point?
I ran over to Ian, and I remember yelling at him that Gabe was gone, everything was okay, he could get up, and we were going to go to the house and see what all was going on. And he wouldn't listen. So I rolled him over, and his eyes were open, but they were flipped back, and he was grunting and trying to speak to me. And I realized things weren't good. So I pulled his hoodie up, and I saw 2 puncture wounds in his upper rib cage. And I grabbed his phone out of his back pocket to call 911. And then I put pressure on his wounds and tried to perform CPR on him.
You did get a hold of someone at 911 with his phone.
Yes, I did.
At some point, did law enforcement arrive at your location?
It took a lot longer than I would have liked. I saw when Gabe took off out of that parking lot, seemed like 2 seconds, and there was some police officer chasing right after him, which led me to believe I thought a police officer witnessed the entire thing because of how fast they got to him.
Brief moment, Your Honor. Mr. McKee, you indicated that you knew Gabe Ybarra from prior contacts. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So if you saw him again, you could identify him. Would that be correct?
Absolutely.
Do you see him in this courtroom today?
I do.
Could you point him out, describe what he's wearing?
Blue button-up shirt, dark pants.
Your Honor, I would ask the record to reflect that Mr. McKee has identified the respondent as the person he interacted with.
The record will still reflect.
Mr. McKee, are you familiar with the boundaries of Harvey County?
Not very well. Not too much other than the signs when you're leaving or entering.
As far as what you do know, this field where this altercation took place, was this within the boundaries of Harvey County?
I would say so, yes.
Your Honor, I think that's all the questions I have for Mr. McKee at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Hara?
Sir, are you stating that Ian Foy ran towards Gabe?
Yes, sir.
He ran towards him to fight?
Yes,
You saw that?
I saw that.
How far did Ian Foy run to fight with Gabe?
I would say 30, 40 feet.
He ran 30 or 40 feet at Gabe while Gabe stood there?
Yes. Bouncing around, yes.
Had you been drinking that night at all?
I had not drank that night. No, I did not.
Did you tell the officer that you had 4 or 5 beers that night?
I don't recall.
Do you remember going to what is described as a thirsty Thursday?
Yes.
What is that?
It's just something everybody that we are friends with has Thursdays off. So it was a time that we all get together and hang out.
And is the reason you get together to drink?
That's what most of the people do, yes.
Okay, and isn't it true that you told, you remember talking to Craig Douglas?
I don't recall that name.
You remember talking to an officer after this happened?
Yes, I talked to an officer.
In a little room?
Yes,
And you wrote out a written statement?
I did.
Do you remember telling Officer Douglas that you'd had 4 or 5 beers that night?
I don't remember.
Do you remember telling Officer Douglas that Ian Foy had had 4 or 5 beers that night?
I don't remember. I don't remember speaking much about alcohol that night.
Isn't it true? Do you remember that night when you said that when the interview first started and you said words to the effect that Gabe Ybarra is a piece of shit?
I probably said that night, yes.
Did you say you wanted him off the street that night?
I said that people like that should not be on the street.
And you said that based on knowing things about him previously, is that correct?
I said that based off of the fact that my friend was carried away in an ambulance and I had to perform CPR on him.
And did you mention the fact that you know for a fact that Gabe Ybarra beats women?
I probably said that, yeah.
You remember when you talked to Officer Douglas, maybe he's a detective, Craig Douglas. Sorry, Detective Douglas. Do you remember saying that you didn't remember why you were going over to Ian's house that night?
I don't recall saying that.
Do you remember saying that it might have been for beer?
There's no chance I said that.
You remember saying that it was for fireworks that night?
Absolutely.
So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that you and Ian Floyd were driving down the street and saw Gabe Ybarra getting in a car, correct?
Yes.
And rather than drive by, you guys took action, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what action did you first do?
My action was because
Tell me what you did.
Ian could not have recognized him of any form. He could have walked up to Gabe and probably not have known who Gabe was.
Okay, just a moment. How do you know that?
Because they weren't in the mutual friend group of that form.
So you don't know that whether Ian Floyd knew Gabe Ybarra or not?
Not 100%. But I mentioned that night the action that was taken. I mentioned that was Gabe getting into Paige's car.
So you
And that
mentioned to Ian Foy that Gabe Ybarra was getting into a girl's car.
yes,
Why did you say that?
I don't know.
And what happened then?
And then Ian turned around.
Why would Ian turn around for that?
I don't know, maybe to think he was defending a girl.
Did you ever use the words that when you told Ian Foy that Ian flipped out?
Ian was upset.
What was he? So when he drove by this car that Gabe Ybarra was getting in, it was someone else's car, a girl's. You told Ian Foy that was Gabe Ybarra getting in that car, correct?
Yes, I told him that.
And according to your testimony, Ian Foy didn't even know Gabe Ybarra, correct?
I would say that would be true, yeah.
So when he sees somebody that he doesn't know getting in somebody's car, Ian Foy flips out. Is that your testimony?
Because we had been
Tell me
listening.
yes or no.
Yeah.
And when by flip out, describe what he did.
He just seemed agitated. He
How
just seemed,
agitated? Like how?
I assumed he was agitated when he flipped around the way he flipped around.
How did he flip around?
Fast.
He was driving a car
A truck.
and he may have been drinking.
May have been.
And how fast did he flip around?
Pretty fast. He didn't touch any curbs or nothing, so it couldn't have been fast enough.
So he did a U-turn in the street.
Yes.
And when he did that U-turn, he came back to where Gabe Ybarra was, correct?
Yes.
And what happened then?
And then Gabe was pulling out from behind the vehicle and Ian started to follow him.
So Ian began following Gabe Ybarra, who he did not know.
Yes.
And he got agitated about somebody he did not know, correct?
Yes.
Were you talking to Ian about Gabe at that time?
Not at that time, no.
Were you telling him, as you described, as
Well,
I asked you earlier, that he was a piece of shit, that he beat women?
No, I didn't say that while we were in the vehicle at all.
What did you say?
The most I had said, I said that not to, like I said earlier, that Gabe was 16, 15, whatever at the time. Ian was an adult and that it was a stupid idea to be chasing this kid down.
Isn't it true in the statement to Detective Douglas that you actually said that he shouldn't hit Gabe because Gabe was underage?
Yes.
You said that if you hit somebody over 3 times, you could get in trouble for that.
I never said that.
All right. So so Ian is upset, flipped out, agitated at Gabe Ybarra, correct?
Yes, he was irritated.
And you and Ian are following Gabe Ybarra driving down the street.
Yes.
And how fast are you going with following?
I couldn't recall. I wouldn't say we were speeding by any means.
Are you close to his car or his truck?
I'd say, yeah.
So you were tailgating him? Ian was tailgating him?
I'd say there was a car length in between.
So what happened then?
And then Gabe got into the right-hand lane and Ian pulled forward and Gabe got behind us.
So then you switched positions, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then did you come up to another light or what happened?
Yes, we came up to an intersection. We were at a red light. I want to say it was flashing at a certain time of night. One side flashes red, the other yellow. We were on the red side, so we were stopped and Gabe pulled to the passenger side.
Is this when you guys Gabe basically told you it was none of your business what he was doing?
Yes.
That's what happened there?
Yes.
And then was there yelling going back and forth?
Yes.
Who was yelling?
Both Gabe, I probably yelled some, and also Ian.
Okay, what did you yell?
That he can't be stealing from Paige.
Or what?
Or he could go to jail. And then Ian's yelling about wanting to fight. Gabe was yelling, wanting to fight.
Okay, tell me what Ian was saying about wanting to fight.
He was bringing up the stealing and that they could handle it that way.
Handle it what way?
In a fight.
What words does he use to the best of your memory? Do you remember?
That's the best of my memory.
How long did this conversation go on?
Maybe 30 seconds.
And there were 2 of you and 1 of him, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So as you're setting at the light, what's the next thing that happens?
Gabe cuts us off and pulls in front of our vehicle.
He pulls in front of your vehicle. So what happens then?
At that point, Gabe jumps out of the vehicle and was bouncing around with his hands up, ready to fight as well.
Okay, but he stood by his vehicle, didn't he?
That's correct.
So, and Ian, what did Ian do at that stage?
At that point, Ian was trying to get out of the vehicle.
Why?
Because he was being coaxed out to fight.
Because Ian wanted to fight?
Because he was being coaxed out of his vehicle to fight.
Okay, but Gabe didn't come up to his vehicle and pull Ian out.
No, it's his demeanor.
And you were holding Ian back from going to fight Gabe?
Yes, I pulled Ian back into the truck.
Okay, so once you got him pulled back in, was Ian still agitated?
It was a little agitated, but at that point, it seemed as if it was done. And then we pulled around him and continued on our way.
So then what happened?
We took after we crossed that intersection, I think it's the second left, I want to say. That might not be correct, which is still on the way to his house, to Ian's house.
Isn't it true what happened was you guys pulled into a road and Gabe went on straight, correct?
That is correct.
And Gabe kept going on, correct?
Correct.
And then Ian put his truck in reverse and sped backwards, what you described as all the way to the stop sign, correct?
Yes, he backed up to the stop sign.
So what happened was Gabe started to drive away, correct? And Ian went a different direction, correct?
That's correct.
And then Ian put his truck in reverse and came back towards Gabe, correct?
Towards the stop sign, yes.
Okay. What was Ian saying when he put his truck in reverse?
Tell me if you see headlights to see if he turned around.
All right, how far did he go while he was in reverse? Do you have any idea?
Let's say 30 feet,
30 feet?
roughly.
Was he driving fast when he was in reverse?
He just reversed to it.
Okay. Do you know the reason did Ian tell you the reason that he was going in reverse?
Well, when he asked me to look to see if Gabe had turned around, I would assume that it was to see if Gabe had turned around.
All right, so then after you went in reverse, did you see Gabe's car?
I saw his headlights
Where were they?
roughly 20 feet from that turn.
All right, so what happened then?
He pulled in behind us, and Ian started driving forward.
Ian drove forward.
Yes.
Then what happened?
And as I saw, the vehicle was not behind us anymore when I looked in the passenger mirror. And when I looked over towards Ian, I saw his truck pulling up, and Ian pulled up into that field.
Ian drove over a curb
Into the field.
So he bounced over a curb and went into just a field?
Yes.
Did he tell you why he was doing that?
I would suspect so that way there wasn't a collision on a truck he was still making payments on.
Again, the question is, did Ian tell you why he did that?
No.
So when he was up in the field, what happened then?
I don't know if Gabe hopped the curb as well, or if he pulled into the driveway that's there. There's, I think, two. And he started driving circles around Ian's truck.
So it's your testimony that Gabe Ybarra drove circles around Ian's truck,
Yes.
right? And then what happened? Did he stop?
At that point, Ian had jumped out and told him to stop and either to stop circling around us or to get out and not take all night doing this.
Okay. Ian, when Gabe was driving around Ian Boy's truck, Ian jumped out and told Gabe to stop going
Yes.
around his truck and get out and fight. Is that correct?
To either stop or get out and handle it.
Well, did he say handle it?
I don't know exactly.
Well, you were there, correct?
I was there.
Ian is yelling at Gabe while he's driving a car, according to your testimony, correct?
Yes. To say with the most accuracy, I would say there was an ultimatum that Ian had given at that point.
What was the ultimatum?
As I said, to either stop circling around the vehicle or to get out of the vehicle.
And get out, did he say get out and do what?
That was it.
Okay, so then Gabe stopped his vehicle and got out of his vehicle, correct?
That's correct.
And Gabe was 30 to 40 feet away from the vehicle that you were in.
Roughly, yes.
And then Ian got out, correct?
Yes,
And you got out, correct?
I did.
And you both moved towards Gabe Ybarra.
Ian did. And I followed behind Ian. And when they met up, I grabbed at Ian's hoodie trying to pull him back.
Okay. Ian ran, according to prior testimony, for 30 or 40 feet.
Yes.
At Gabe Ybarra, correct?
Yes,
And you followed Ian when he ran towards Gabe Ybarra, correct?
that's correct.
And when Ian got up to Gabe Ybarra, you grabbed Ian, correct?
Yes, I was trying to yank him back.
And then Gabe Ybarra and Ian Foy started dancing around with each other, correct?
And swinging what looked like open hands, correct.
Well, do you remember for sure that they were open hands, or isn't it true that someone may have hit someone?
I never saw a connection. I never once saw any form of connection. As I said, it was the weirdest physical confrontation I had ever seen.
But you're saying also that Ian was doing the same thing with his hands.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, did you see Gabe Ybarra with his hands overhanded, underhanded, sideways, or what?
They look like side slaps.
Do you remember who hit first?
I don't remember. I was at that point just trying to grab Ian and stop him from getting into a fight with an underage kid.
Okay. So would you agree with the statement that Ian Foy and Gabe Ybarra were involved in a fight with each other at that stage?
Well, it looked like it, yeah.
Well, you were there. Was it a fight?
To me, it didn't look like a fight. It didn't look like anybody ever got connected. It didn't look like they ever touched each other.
Were they screaming at each other?
Not really not that I remember, no.
They weren't talking at all?
No,
They weren't threatening each other?
not that I'm aware of.
Isn't it true that Ian Foy threatened Gabe Ybarra that night?
If you want to call the ultimatum of get out of the truck or stop circling us, I would, yeah.
How long did this, what you call an awkward fight go on while you were standing beside it?
Felt like 20, 30 seconds, if that.
And then what happened when it ended?
Well, Ian started to run away, holding his side, and Gabe took off after him.
And did he catch him?
No, he did not.
So Gabe stopped?
They did roughly 1 or 2 laps around Ian's truck. Then Ian started running across the street. Gabe started to take off after him. And that's when I yelled out a pretend dispatch call that Gabe had attacked my friend.
Okay, I do have a question. You say it was a pretend call. Did you have a phone with you?
I did not have a phone on me. I covered my hand. I did
Then when you said that, what did Gabe Ybarra do?
ran to his truck and took off.
And drove away?
Yes.
Now, you never really saw a knife. What you saw was a silver object,
I
correct?
saw a silver object in his hand when he ran away.
And also, you don't know when the connection was made with that knife and Ian Foy, correct?
I have a strong feeling, but not for certainty.
You didn't really see
No.
either one of them hit each other.
No.
So after this is done, Gabe Ybarra drives away, and then you approach Ian Foy. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Then you get his phone and call 911, correct?
After I assessed the damage, yes.
So how long did you wait to call?
At that point, everything felt very drawn out. I would probably say 20 seconds at tops. But my time frame at that point, when I pulled Ian's hoodie up and saw his face, is very different than what it really was. I thought I did CPR on him for 15 minutes when only I did it for 5.
That person.
You may.
Approach him.
You may.
Sir, I want to hand you a document. This is your written statement.
Yes, it is my handwriting.
Review that, and see if that's what you wrote.
Without reading it, I can tell I wrote it all. It's all in my handwriting.
All right. Did you write that right after this happened?
I would say roughly an hour after.
I just want to ask you a question here. You realize, do you hear where it says that, there's a reference here, Ian hopped out and Gabe pulled away, parked about 2 feet away. You see that?
I do see that.
Is that what happened?
That's not what happened. No.
And then you say Ian, from 2 feet away, Ian and Gabe started throwing hands.
It does say that.
But it wasn't 2 feet away.
It definitely was not 2 feet away.
And you wrote this the same night that it happened?
Roughly an hour afterwards, yes.
Did you remember that night? You saying to Gabe, or Ian saying to Gabe, have fun being a future inmate?
I don't recall. I don't remember saying that.
Remember Ian saying that?
Once they were yelling back and forth, it was pretty much just chaos. I couldn't pinpoint an identical thing.
You may.
Sir, if you just read the first page of that, tell me if it refreshes your memory, I won't say.
I do see that.
Okay. Let me ask you again. Did you say words to the effect about Gabe Ybarra, have fun being a future inmate?
I may have, but it doesn't re-jog that memory of saying those words.
Do you remember Ian Foy saying those words?
No,
Just to be clear, did you write down in your statement that those words were said?
I did write that down.
And who did you say said them?
I said that I said them in this statement.
Just a second, Your Honor. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect, Mr. Baca.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. McKee, you indicated that before February 25th of 2021, you knew who Mr. Ybarra was, correct?
That's correct.
How would you describe your relationship with Mr. Ybarra before that day?
When I first met Gabe, I thought he was a really cool kid, really good kid.
You ever recall any verbal disputes with Gabe Ybarra before February 25th?
Yes. There would always be the times where all of our girlfriends' wives, whatever it would be, they'll chat with each other over the problems and stuff they're having with their significant other. And there would be random days where Paige would call my wife and it would be about whether a fight or taking her car, or there was something, you never knew when it was going to happen or not. And there was one time where I called the police due to Paige had said she had mentioned something to my wife about her head getting banged up against the wall and that she was walking.
Excuse me, I object to yourself.
Mr. Baca.
Your Honor, I don't need to follow up on that thing. Mr.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right, objection sustained.
Mr. McKee, did you ever have any physical altercations with Gabe Ybarra before February 25th?
No.
Would you say you and Mr. Ybarra were friends before February 25th?
There was a falling out that night. I was just speaking of, that was it. That was pretty much the end of a friendship.
Now, you indicated to Mr. O'Hara that you did not believe that Ian Foy knew Gabe Ybarra before that day. Is that correct?
I believe he did not.
Did Mr. Foy know Paige Dotson?
Other than that night, I think that was the night he met her. I may be incorrect on that. Maybe they met prior to that. I believe, to my acknowledgement, they met that night.
Okay. You indicated that night when you observed Mr. Ybarra in Paige Dotson's vehicle, did you inform Mr. Foy that that was her vehicle?
Yeah, to that area, yeah.
And was it your belief that Mr. Ybarra was taking things out of that vehicle without permission?
It was my assumption.
Did you make that assumption known to Mr. Foy?
I'm sure at some point, yeah.
And you said he became agitated.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. O'Hara was asking about statements that he believed you made about Gabe Ybarra, that Gabe Ybarra was a piece of shit. Do you recall making that statement?
I could have easily said that.
When do you think, if you did, you made that statement?
For sure, I probably would have said things like that after I was either on the scene speaking to the detective or back at the station.
How were you emotionally after you had done CPR on Mr. McKee?
Not good.
Or Mr. Foy, excuse me.
Not well.
Would you say you were angry?
I was feeling a lot of things. I was scared. I was angry, more worried than anything.
And these statements that Mr. O'Hara asked you about, that you made about Gabe Ybarra, you believe those were after you had called dispatch. Is that correct?
That, right. Yeah.
Mr. O'Hara was asking you that you and Ian followed Gabe Ybarra in his vehicle.
That's correct.
At some point, however, Gabe Ybarra got behind your vehicle. Is that correct?
That is correct.
He didn't drive off to a different location
No.
that you recall? And then at some point, you indicated that, was it Mr. Foy that drove into a parking lot and Gabe Ybarra continued to drive on? Is that correct?
Not, and he didn't pull into a parking lot. He just pulled onto the street to get to their trailer, and Gabe continued going straight west down First Street.
And after that, at some point, it was Gabe Ybarra who returned. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You indicated that Mr. Foy backed his truck up towards the stop sign.
Because there's a tree line there.
How far was that distance he backed up?
I want to say 20, 30 feet around that area.
But it was Mr. Ybarra that drove back to the location.
That's correct.
You indicated that when you stopped in the field, it was Mr. Ybarra that drove circles around your vehicle, correct?
That is correct.
And an ultimatum was given from Mr. Foy to either go away or stop. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right, I object. These are leading questions, the state questions.
I'll sustain that.
After you observed Mr. Ybarra's vehicle circling your vehicle, what did you say happened next?
So he was circling the vehicle. Ian had stepped out of his vehicle on the driver's side and given the ultimatum. At that point, Gabe pulled away on the north side. He was parked north of us. I would say about 30 to 40 feet.
Mr. Ybarra didn't drive off. Is that correct?
That's correct. He parked and got out of his vehicle.
Your testimony was that Ian Foy started running towards Gabe Ybarra. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you were behind Mr. Foy trying to stop him. Would that be correct?
That is correct.
Again, Your Honor, objection leading.
Sustained.
As Mr. Foy was approaching Gabe Ybarra, what did you observe Gabe Ybarra do?
Just jumping around in an agitated state as if ready to fight.
Did he get back in his vehicle, Gabe
No.
Ybarra?
Not until he left. And that is as far as I'm aware of, because I was watching Ian I was chasing after Ian.
Mr. McKee, do you know the age of Paige Dotson?
Currently, I would guess 22.
Your Honor, I think that's all the questions I have for Mr. McKee.
Recross, Mr. O'Hara.
None, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused.
It's fine for the state, Your Honor.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You may step down. Yes. We'll be in recess for about 10 minutes.
All right. Not trying to. I know that's Thank you. How you recover testimony or get it without you getting paid. No, that's right. Yeah. Do we need anything else? I would like more statements, Ybarra, and I think see that if it weren't donuts that day, we're circling near him. So I think when Winslow says, I showed up and see trends. I see circles around the Q's track. That's a pretty good physical behavior. Yeah. It's established that you get back. You can't come so. Now you know what I've wrestled with house. So I think we're done. I just try this day. Oh, you can't. So yeah, I follow motion. Just to say everything you say is there. Yes, go ahead. Okay. All right.
Thank you. You may be seated. I'm going to wait because I don't want to be distracted or interrupted. So you can be seated. I was just waiting for everybody to get in here. Do you have further evidence?
Your with the admissions of states 1, 2, and 3 for the purposes of this motion, state the rest. And make an announcement, Your Honor. Learned, I guess, unfortunately, that the microphones are still on and YouTube is broadcasting. So any conversations that attorneys would have in the courtroom during recess are being published out on YouTube. So future hearings, you might want to find some attorneys. It's our state regarding the Harvey.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. O'Hara, do you wish to present any evidence today, sir?
Your Honor, all we have is a letter from Bob Johnson's JV-21 that the state has agreed to give
Yes, Your Honor, Mr. Harvey presented the letter. I have no objection to this motion.
Thank you. You may, sir. And we'll call this juvenile respondent A for purposes of the record.
And Your Honor, we have no further actions.
Counsel, do you wish to make closing arguments?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Your Honor, I'll try and be as brief as possible. However, the court's well aware that the statute we're here for today under KSA 38-2347 does include up to 8 factors for the court to consider today. The testimony presented today does not cover all of those factors, which is why the state's wanting to review between the admitted evidence and testimony all of the factors that we believe. First of all, to restate the burden, the juvenile is presumed to be a juvenile, and it is the state's burden to rebut that presumption by a preponderance of the evidence. That is the state's burden here today, what we're looking at. The statute under subsection D goes on to say, in determining whether or not prosecution as an adult should be authorized, the court must consider the following factors, and it's these factors that we'd like to review. Your Honor, the first factor is the seriousness of the alleged offense and whether the protection of the community requires prosecution as an adult, which we believe it does. As the court stated, the respondent here today is charged with murder in the 2nd degree, a level 1 person felony case. It's about as serious of an offense that you can have. The very unfortunate outcome of this offense is the gravest outcome that could happen from nearly any altercation. Your Honor, it goes on to talk about within that factor that the protection of the community requires protection as an adult. Several of the factors here pertain to what we believe would be the history of Mr. Ybarra, and I think this does as well. Obviously, he's got the most serious charge you can have with the worst possible outcome, but this isn't his first time. Mr. Ybarra has been in the Juvenile Justice Code before. According to the journal entries that we have submitted, as well as listed on page 4 of my motion, he currently has 4 pending cases that have not reached adjudication, but all contain person charges. 19 JV-21 has 2-person felony charges at level 3, a level 5-person felony charge, and another level 5-person felony charge. All of these also include alleged victims within our community. 20 JV-21 is a battery, another victim in the community charge. That's a B-person misdemeanor. 21 JV-7, a criminal threat charge, level 9-person felony, also involving a victim in our community. 21 JV-25 has a criminal threat, level 9-person felony. These are all cases that he has pending that he also has charges on, all with listed victims in this community. Your Honor, as far as his history, as included in the admitted evidence, the certified journal entries, 17 JV-84, this is a case that he has an adjudication on. This was a criminal discharge of a firearm at an occupied building, level 7-person felony involving victims in our community. He was on probation for this, and as the journal entries state, did not perform on probation and reached the point where that probation was revoked, and he was sent to a juvenile correctional facility on that case. Your Honor, 18 JV, what I believe was corrected, 18, he was also ordered to the juvenile correctional facility for that case. Essentially, what we're showing in this first factor, Your Honor, is the community does require prosecution as an adult because, simply put, Mr. Ybarra has been through every sentencing alternative that the juvenile code has to offer, and it's failed him, and it's failed to protect a member of this community. The juvenile code has nothing left that can either help Mr. Ybarra or curb his violent behavior. Not only has he had every alternative in probation, he's also spent time in a juvenile correctional facility, and he's not only had the occurrence of this case, he has 4 other pending cases that has not curbed his behavior. Moving on to the next factor, Your Honor, whether this alleged offense was committed in an aggressive, violent, premeditated or willful manner. I know this is a preliminary hearing. We've decided that. We've heard testimony today and the state's comment on the testimony, not to get too back into it, but certainly Mr. Ybarra was at minimum a mutual combatant. According to testimony of Mr. McKee, he had several opportunities to drive off, go away, and didn't do that. When Mr. Foy approached Mr. Ybarra, rather than getting in his vehicle, locking himself in the vehicle or driving away, he made the decision to use a weapon on Mr. Foy, again, costing Mr. Foy his life. Mr. Foy's family is without a son, without a fiance, and without a dear friend, thanks to the actions of Mr. Ybarra. We believe the state's met this factor, and it was committed in an aggressive, violent, and willful manner. Factor 3, Your Honor, I believe is very similar, whether the offense was against a person or a property. Greater weight is given to whether the offense was against a person. The court has admitted the forensic report. We've heard the testimony from Mr. McKee about the altercation. The forensic report does state that Mr. McKee did pass away from the wounds inflicted by Mr. Ybarra. Clearly, this was an offense against a person. I believe we've met that factor as well. Factor 4, Your Honor, was what we just covered, and for the court's reference is also listed on page 4 of our motion. Again, there are a number of alleged offenses unadjudicated and pending against Mr. Ybarra. Those are all listed. All of his pending cases have at least one person offense charge, several of them felonies, again, all victims in this community. In regards to the 5th factor, Your Honor, this reviews his history, whether he has been adjudicated as a juvenile offender under this code, and whether those prior adjudications were against persons or property. 17 JV-84 was a person felony that, again, can't state with enough emphasis that he had been on probation. Everything that was offered to him for probation had failed, to the point where he was eventually had his probation revoked and even spent time in a juvenile correctional facility. And again, here we are, Your Honor, facing consequences of his decisions and his behavior. In regards to factor 6, this relates to the sophistication and maturity of the juvenile as determined by consideration of his home environment, emotional attitude, having a living desire to be treated as an adult. Your Honor, this is where the state would reference the exhibit of his school records. In reviewing those that have been stipulated to, the respondent has decided to make a decision not to attend any school or GED program. This decision was made in November of 2020. Those records reflect that he has been out of the Newton High School and not in any other kind of alternative learning program since that date. The current state of this was February 25th of 2021. So it's not because of what happened in this case that he chose to leave school. He made that decision a long time ago. Made that decision to leave school, which I think indicates his desire to be treated as an adult. Within those records, you'll find well over, we'll just say more than 20 incidents of in-school suspension for disruptive behavior at school. Your Honor, he's made the decision even when he was at school to not abide by the rules. And I think, again, shows a history that he desires to make his own decisions and be treated as an adult. Your Honor, factor 7, I believe, might be the most important factor within these. And that is whether there are facilities or programs available to the court which would likely rehabilitate the juvenile prior to the expiration of its jurisdiction under this code. Your Honor, we can't state enough again, he's been on probation before. All the sentencing alternatives that are available under 382361 have either been considered or been enforced on Mr. Ybarra through his prior cases. And all of those prior cases resolved unsuccessfully, even to the point where he's been in a juvenile correctional facility. That is the highest outcome the juvenile code can have, is sending a juvenile to the juvenile correctional facility. He's been through all of that, and it has not curbed his violent behavior. Not only in this case, but the 4 pending cases that he has before him, all of which occurred after he spent time in a juvenile correctional facility. Your Honor, there's really nothing left that this code could do to either rehabilitate Mr. Ybarra or protect the community from his behavior. Finally, Your Honor, the last factor, the interests of the respondent in the community would be better served by criminal prosecution. Again, we've stated this before. We've now reached a point where he has taken someone's life after having been through every alternative under the juvenile code. And I just can't state enough that this code's failed him and has failed this community. And it's exhausted any other possible resolutions that could come through this code. And so therefore, under that factor, I believe the interests of the juvenile and the community would be better served if you were prosecuted as an adult. Finally, Your Honor, I will point out within the same statute that we're considering here, it does state that the insufficiency of evidence pertaining to any one or more of the factors listed in this subsection in and of itself shall not be determinative of the issue. The reason I state that is I think the code is clearly stating that not all of these factors need to be met in order for the court to make a decision to prosecute as an adult. I think this shows just how overwhelming Mr. Ybarra's history and behavior are, in that the statute considers that not all the factors apply, but yet he has met all 8 of the factors. And for that reason, and for the failure of the juvenile code to protect this community and rehabilitate Mr. Ybarra, we're asking the court to order adult prosecution against him.
Thank you, Mr. Baca. Mr. O'Hara?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I understand what the law is, and I understand what the factors are. This case appears to be an unfortunate incident that resulted in a death. These were adults that engaged with this juvenile. He was getting something out of a car, and that's what started this. And there was obviously a lot of anger from both sides. And there's obviously some arguments for some defenses to this crime, and whether it is actually an aggressive, premeditated, or willful manner about what happened. But in addition to that, Your Honor, and I understand the history of the defendant, without getting into it too much, I talked to the family. They hate to get everything that's been involved with Mr. Ybarra. But I can say that the last letter that we just put in there kind of defeats some of the things that are argued by the state here. He's been in custody since February, and he's evidently doing very well. And I know sometimes people do well in custody. They do well in custody because they have rules they have to follow, and they have to do what they're supposed to do. And he appears to be doing very well at that. And he was 16 when this happened. He's 17 now. And I think what the state's saying is we want to put him in jail with a bunch of adults. It seems to me that that would be as harmful as anything at this stage, especially in light of what the facts surrounding this case really have shown a little bit today. But he is doing very well. He's trying very hard. And sometimes, you have to make a lot of mistakes before you catch on to what you need to do. And we would submit that Mr. Ybarra, by that letter, has understood what he needs to do and can be rehabilitated in the juvenile system. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel, I haven't looked at the exhibits. I would like to do that. I am familiar with the factors, have heard the evidence, but I would like to take some time to look at the exhibits. If you can give me 15 to 20 minutes, I'll come back and announce a decision. So we'll be in recess for the next 20 minutes or so. So I went back into my office and reviewed again the factors under KSA 38-2347, subsection D. I reviewed the autopsy report, the various complaints in Harvey County District Court in the juvenile system. I reviewed the school records quickly. I didn't look at attendance and those types of things. And again, read the letter from Jake Miller from Reno County Youth Services. So I'm going to go through the factors one by one. The first of those is the seriousness of the alleged offense and whether the protection of the community requires prosecution as an adult or as extended jurisdiction juvenile prosecution. It gets no more serious than taking someone's life. So this is a serious offense. But it doesn't stop there. It's the seriousness of the offense and whether the protection of the community requires prosecution as an adult. And so looking at the other evidence presented here today, in addition to this charge, Gabe Ybarra is charged with 6 additional person felonies that are pending. Not convictions yet, but they're pending. 6 pending in 3 different cases. There is 1 prior person felony for which Mr. Ybarra has been adjudicated. And in addition, there are 3 other pending cases, one of which includes battery, a misdemeanor, not a serious offense, but another person offense. I believe the community requires protection. The second factor is whether the alleged offense was committed in an aggressive, violent, premeditated, or willful manner. I understand from the questions here today, or I'm anticipating that there might be claims about the acts of the victim or witnesses, but it's clear that Mr. Ybarra had opportunities to leave the confrontation on more than one occasion and chose not to. At one point, he pulled in front of the alleged victim and the witness here today to prevent them, or at least attempt to prevent them from driving away. They did, in fact, drive away. He came back. He could have left when Mr. Foy jumped out of his truck, but chose not to do that. In addition, he then used a knife, and according to the autopsy, the stab wounds were to the chest. So they weren't wounds of, I'm just going to hurt you to try to get you to go away. Mr. Foy was stabbed twice in the chest. The third factor is whether the offense was against a person or against property. Greater weight shall be given to offenses against persons, especially if personal injury resulted. Again, someone died. Number 5, the previous history of the juvenile, including whether the juvenile had been adjudicated a juvenile offender under this code. That has happened. And if so, whether the offenses were against persons. That has happened. And any other previous history of antisocial behavior or patterns of physical violence. As I was going through the school records, counsel, I will tell you, I largely ignored everything from the 2017-2018 school year because I'm aware that that is when roughly the time period before Mr. Ybarra was sent to the juvenile correctional facility. So I did look through those, but just looked very quickly because I was more interested to see what behavior was after that experience. And these are in no particular order. On March 4 of 2020, Mr. Ybarra was confronted by someone at school, an authority figure. He was instructed to go to the office. Food staff service complied and did not serve him as they were told not to. Mr. Ybarra then turned around and said to, I believe, Fred Becker, and I'm quoting, "Get the fuck away from me," and leaned toward me. He then repeated, "Get the fuck away from me," and leaned toward me again. He was close enough that saliva hit this reporter's eyeglasses. That was at the very least confrontational behavior with what I would consider to be threatening behavior. In December of 2019, Gabe Y was refusing to work on his project and insisted that he, quote, broke his Chromebook in half, end quote. Another student said he doubted that was the case. Gabe began calling him names. I won't repeat the names. The two got very close to getting into a fight, with Gabe taunting Aaron to, quote, "Hit me, come on, hit me, and I'll clock you." September of 2019, Gabe was bullying another student, and this student began cussing him out. Gabe has been causing conflict with this student regularly. He enjoys messing with him. He's done everything from moving his books and stealing a seat to throwing things, making fun of him. Last class with a sub, this student got so mad he punched a wall. I grew very concerned. We were worried a fight would break out. I tried to calm the situation and take both boys into the office to talk it out. However, Gabe went into the other direction and ignored my calls to him, and instead, I assume, left the building out the back way. I'm growing very concerned about having the two boys in class together, as there's an altercation almost every period that I have to calm down. In August of 2019, Gabe was asked to pull his pants up. Gabe ignored me and kept walking. Gabe was then asked to stop. He continued to ignore me. As was walking by me, still ignoring me, he was talking about his math teacher. Again, I'm quoting, "I hate my fucking math teacher. I'm about to slap that bitch." I would classify that as a threat. This is in the report. Regardless, the student was insubordinate. So there's a pattern on the part of Mr. Ybarra there's a pattern of physical violence with Mr. Ybarra. The next factor is the sophistication or maturity of the juvenile as determined by consideration of the juvenile's home, environment, emotional attitude, pattern of living, or desire to be treated as an adult. I personally don't find this factor as strong as the others, but as has been stated, I don't have to find equally on all the factors. I would say there is evidence that Mr. Ybarra wants to be treated as an adult, because he certainly won't listen prior to Reno County Youth Services to any adult in authority over him. Number 7, whether there are facilities or programs available to the court which are likely to rehabilitate the juvenile prior to the expiration of the court's jurisdiction under this code. Our facilities or programs seem to have been exhausted. As has been mentioned, Gabe spent time at the juvenile correctional facility. And since discharge from that facility, we have many new cases that have been filed involving person felonies. We have ongoing disciplinary actions at school. I understand he's not in school anymore. But we've gone to the max in the one case and yet still have multiple cases yet to deal with. The last factor is in some ways the most troubling to me, not because of the lack of evidence, but it requires the court to basically make a choice. Because the last factor is whether the interests of the juvenile or of the community would be better served by criminal prosecution. I certainly cannot find that Gabe Ybarra's interests are better served by criminal prosecution, but I'm not required to make that finding because it's either or. And unfortunately, I do believe that for the sake of the community would be better served by criminal prosecution. And when I have to make that choice, particularly with the facts that have been presented here today, I have to choose for the protection and the best interests of the community. So I'm granting the state's motion to authorize prosecution as an adult. Council, I know we need to make further settings in this case. I don't know what the state's plan is with regard to the other pending juvenile cases.
Your plan for state now will file a complaint to go along with the motion we granted today. As to the juvenile cases, we're going to ask the court to keep those in a status setting as we proceed through
Okay,
the adult prosecution on this one case. I believe we need to set a preliminary hearing date. We may need to set a defense motion if we want to claim defense.
Mr. Lane, how quickly would you anticipate the state being able to get that motion filed? I'm sorry, the amended complaint filed?
You know, I can have that by tomorrow. Say today, but I was in my office for a few minutes this afternoon.
And it certainly doesn't, I'm not ordering that it be done tomorrow, but for purposes of scheduling, I want to make sure that I'm not scheduling too quickly.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm kind of hitting a couple of topics here at once. I think council is aware of the capacity of the court's docket at this particular time. Given that, I'm wondering, I know that no complaint has been filed yet, but council, would you like for me to go ahead and set a preliminary hearing? Because I can tell you it's not going to be till January if we schedule it today. And Mr. O'Hara, I understand if you would prefer that I not do that, that's fine. I just want you to know we're jammed up, and so I don't want to delay things further than necessary.
I understand, Your Honor, and I guess I could leave it up to Your Honor. Obviously, the complaint's going to be what's been filed already, I think. They told them, they're shaking their head in the affirmative, I believe, so.
Your Honor, it's going to be the same charge, but we're going to format it for a complaint. So
Right.
I believe that we're on the same page.
And I don't know whether he has to have a formal appearance on that, or.
I would plan to do a formal appearance, but I can do that. Our practice here, Mr. O'Hara, is once the complaint is filed, I know that currently, Mr. Ybarra is at Reno County Youth Services. I would try to set up a Zoom hearing to do a first appearance, simply to do some of the things I did today, but I need to do it from the criminal standpoint to advise him of the charges, potential penalties, his trial rights, preliminary hearing rights, and then make further settings.
And we can do it now if Your Honor wants to, or we can wait and do it then. Whichever. I don't know whether it makes any difference to me.
I recognize we all know what the charge will be, but I'm not comfortable doing it without a complaint in front of me.
Okay, so why don't we wait Saturday after I get the complaint?
Okay, all right. Council, I have some time available the afternoon of November 1. I could take this up at 3 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock.
Your Honor, I'm going to be out of town that week. I might be able, or at least I'm scheduled to be. Might be able to have somebody else do it, but I won't be.
That would simply be, well, it would be for status and trying to schedule the preliminary hearing. So it probably, you're out that whole week.
I am, Your Honor. At least I'm scheduled to be. Things seem to change quickly. Today's world.
I fully understand that. It sounds like from what I've heard, this at least time-wise works for the state. October 19th, I have 15 minutes left at 10:45.
That works with Steve.
That should work for me, Your Honor.
Okay. What I would plan, council, is that would be status on the JV cases, and I can just do first appearance in the new case at that time if that suits everyone.
Yes, Your Honor. Will that be by Zoom?
I'll do, well, I'm sorry, I don't have time to do it by Zoom on that time, so that would need to be in person.
No.
Yes, and so, yes, it would be in person. Again, for status in the JV cases, and first appearance in the criminal complaint to be filed. Council, I want to make sure I get your exhibits back to you. Is there anything else we need to take up today from Mr. Lane?
Just to clarify, October 19th instead of person. On transport here. Zoom link for just want to be sure.
Yes, and I will tell you that I was first thinking, oh, we could do Mr. Ybarra by Zoom, but he will be losing his juvenile status, and so I don't want to assume that we can do that first appearance by Zoom, so I was assuming he would be transported back.
Then the state will drive the transport.
Thank you.
Nothing.
Thank you.
Nothing from us, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. Again, council, I want to get your exhibits back to you. I have just a couple small comments. First, to the folks in the courtroom, I know these are difficult proceedings. It's not easy to listen to this testimony. It's not easy to watch these things play out. I appreciate that everyone remained quiet and respectful. So I appreciate that. Mr. Ybarra, I'm sure that this is not the outcome that you were wanting today, sir. But I actually am impressed by this letter from Mr. Miller. It didn't change the ruling today. But it shows that you have capacity, sir, to, as he says, create an upward spiral in your life. And so I would urge you to continue that. You can continue to do that. It can make a difference for you and for others. And so I hope that you will continue to do that. If there's nothing further, we're adjourned.
Thank you, Judge.